the unnatural zero reading on the EMF device felt less like a glitch and more like a stolen breath. Kai, the engineer who relied on measurable reality, stood paralyzed by the impossible subtraction. The chaotic noise he usually fled was replaced by a sterile, perfect vacuum that somehow felt louder than any shell burst. This was not the healing silence of isolation, it was the preemptive hush of a predator. He recognized the smell now. It wasn't just ozone, but the distinct scent of electrical discharge, frozen in time, mingling with the bitter, coppery tang of mineral dust. Rex, usually distracted by the sense of the forest floor, pressed his shoulder firmly against Kai's leg, a low, guttural vibration replacing any audible warning. The dog was staring intently at the basalt beneath their feet, his hackles barely raised, conveying an alert far more potent than barking. Rex wasn't reacting to a bear or a coyote, he was reacting to a change in the static atmosphere, the way one reacts to the subtle pressure drop before a storm. Kai slowly knelt, running his gloved fingers over the slick, unnervingly smooth black stone. The basalt was ice-cold despite the humid air, but the moss clinging to it was robust, unnaturally bright emerald against the deep matte black. He tapped the surface with a small metallic pick. The resulting sound was dull, thick, and instantly attenuated, a note strangled before it could truly resonate. This bridge wasn't merely built from this strange stone, it was an integral part of the physics anomaly, its dense composition acting as a sink for all measurable energy. He remembered the old, half-mad stories told by the few remaining Oakhaven locals, whispers of a time before the loggers, of a deep, indigenous history that claimed the viaduct was the stone rib of the world, a place where the veil between things was thin. As an engineer, he dismissed them as fanciful superstition. Now, looking at the bridge's perfect, impossibly dark material, he realized the impossibility wasn't in the structure itself, but in the assumption that its builders were human. The cold deepened, coiling around his chest and seeping into his lungs. He instinctively pulled his gaze from the mist below and looked up. The mist was no longer merely atmospheric water vapor, it was shifting, acquiring a heavy, slow density immediately above the viaduct. It looked like static television visualized, a shimmering boundary that didn't move with the wind, but pulsed faintly, a subtle distortion of the air itself. And then, the silence changed again. It lost its hungry quality and became possessive, almost territorial. Kai felt the pressure mount, a profound spiritual weight descending, not impacting his ears, but pressing directly onto his consciousness. It was a communication without sound, an immense, demanding awareness that recognized his intrusion. In the combat engineer's mind, built on calculation and hard logistics, a terrible thought formed that the viaduct was not a place built to cross a chasm, it was a mechanism built to access the emptiness beyond the laws of physics, and by walking upon it, he had activated the mechanism. Rex shifted, placing his large head protectively over Kai's knee, his amber eyes fixed on a point far above the mist line. Kai followed the dog's gaze, past the thick canopy and toward the perpetually overcast sky. He saw nothing, yet the presence grew until his skin crawled with the unmistakable feeling of being scanned, measured, and judged by something profoundly inhuman, something that had waited centuries in the perfect, deep silence he had sought as his refuge. The silence of Oakhaven had promised peace, but it had delivered him instead to a watchful, alien divinity. Kai found the silence of Oakhaven oppressive, yet necessary. It was a suffocating quiet that settled over the abandoned logging town in the Pacific Northwest, a place where the deep, wet forest had begun reclaiming asphalt and corrugated iron. The permanent veil of grey mist and the smell of decaying cedar were perfect camouflage for a man seeking to outrun the explosive echoes of his past. For Kai, silence was not peace, it was merely the absence of the trigger. Years after his combat engineering tour, his PTSD had metastasized into a physical affliction. Sudden, sharp noises, a slamming door, a car backfiring, didn't just frighten him, they registered as concussive blows that left him breathless and paralyzed. In Oakhaven, the only sound was the patient drip of the canopy, a rhythm his frayed nerves could tolerate. His only companion, and the anchor that kept him tethered to reality, was Rex, a battered but profoundly loyal German shepherd. Rex, old and wise, was a creature of intuitive stillness. He possessed an uncanny ability to sense the subtle shifts in Kai's anxiety, offering a warm, heavy presence that required no words. It was Rex who led him to the structure that defined the town's unsettling isolation, the Aetheric Viaduct. The viaduct was a grotesque monument to forgotten infrastructure. It spanned a deep, perpetually shadowed gorge, its massive arches carved from dense black basalt that seemed to absorb all light. moss and ice clung to its surface like morbid drapery. It was too grand for a simple logging track, possessing a terrifying, almost ancient Gothic symmetry. The stone felt alien, rough, and unnaturally cold even on the warmest summer days. No historical record in the dilapidated county archives explained who built it or why. Kai's engineering mind treated the viaduct like a mathematical problem demanding a solution. He quickly realized the structure was the source of Oakhaven's deepest secret. The area surrounding the viaduct was a complete electrical void. He had started with simple experiments, radios went dead, phones wouldn't charge, and digital cameras simply failed to power on within a 100-yard radius. Initially, he suspected a massive, localized magnetic anomaly. But as he pressed closer, testing the field with specialized instruments scavenged from Seattle surplus stores, the truth was far stranger. It wasn't interference, it was devouring. The midpoint of the bridge, the apex over the darkest part of the gorge, what Kai internally dubbed the zero point, it was a complete power sink, an absolute dead zone that seemed to actively consume all electronic energy flowing into it. It was the first undeniable physical manifestation of something fundamentally wrong with reality. Standing near the 0 point, Rex whimpered low in his throat, a sound of deep unease. Kai felt it too. A profound, bone-deep cold radiated upwards, not just the cold of the stone or the misty air, but a cold that felt like being submerged in liquid nitrogen, a cold that seemed to originate from before time. It was a premonition, a horrifying sense that something vast and terrible was patiently waiting, held back by only the thinnest of membranes. He knew, with a certainty that iced his blood, that the 0 point was not a terminus, but a threshold. The change came abruptly, 3 days after Kai's initial discovery, heralded not by sound, but by an unnerving shift in the atmosphere. The temperature plummeted past all natural reason. This was no ordinary Pacific Northwest chill. A pallid, dense white vapor, time frost, slithered out of the gorge, enveloping the viaduct and the surrounding forest. It was thicker than any marine layer, seeming to possess a crystalline structure that played havoc with vision. Light entering the fog didn't scatter normally, it refracted, splitting into agonizingly sharp, angular beams that made the world look jagged and unstable. The air grew heavy, almost viscous, thick with a pungent odor that made Kai instinctively cover his mouth. It was the smell of ozone, intensely concentrated, mingled with the acidic, metallic tang of superheated iron, an olfactory contradiction that spoke of immense, unstable energy. Even the familiar drip of water from the canopy seemed muffled, absorbed, or perhaps slowed by the dense atmosphere. Kai, drawn by the impossible cold and Rex's insistent, low growling, found himself at the viaduct's edge. He carried only a heavy wrench and his specialized Geiger counter, which, despite the general electronic dead zone, used an analog display that still registered something horrific. The readings were spiking off the charts, suggesting a catastrophic release of unknown particulate matter. But the physical signs were worse. The basalt of the viaduct was no longer simply cold and mossy. Along the main span, especially nearing the 0 point, Kai spotted fresh markings. They were not cracks caused by freezing, they were intricate, sharp lines etched deep into the stone, resembling highly focused lightning scars, though the air remained still. They looked less like geological damage and more like a wound, a surgical burn left by something that used energy as a cutting tool. They smelled strongly of the hot metal and ozone saturating the air. Rex, usually placid, was vibrating with urgency, pulling violently on the leash. His eyes, fixed on the thickest part of the time frost hovering over the 0 point, were wide and frantic. He had seen the scorch marks too, and instinct told him the bridge was active. "No, Rex, stop!" Kai hissed, clutching the leash tight. His heart was hammering, but this time, it wasn't the terror of a sudden noise, it was the icy dread of the unnatural. But Rex was beyond obedience. With a powerful lunge, the old dog slipped his collar, a soundless snap of leather against the wet air. Rex burst onto the viaduct, running towards the 0 point with the single-minded focus of a tracker on a scent. "Rex! Get back!" Kai screamed, though the sound was instantly swallowed by the dense fog, turning into a weak, strangled echo barely audible even to himself. Kai watched, paralyzed for a split second by a fear more primal than any combat flashback. Rex was almost halfway across, a dark, desperate shape disappearing into the crystalline white. Then, he reached the exact spatial coordinate Kai had identified as the 0 point. It wasn't a transition, It was an erasure. There was no sound, no yelp, no scrape of claws, no collision. Rex simply ceased to exist. One moment, his familiar silhouette strained against the brilliant white fog, the next, there was nothing. No trace. No residual movement. The physical space Rex occupied became abruptly vacant, followed by a sudden, intense gust of super-cold wind that slammed into Kai, stealing his breath and penetrating his clothes like a physical wound. The shock was immediate, total, and crippling. Rex was gone. His anchor, his silent guard, erased by a field of absolute stillness. For a man whose entire nervous system was dedicated to avoiding high-intensity sensory input, this absolute vacuum of the incident was the most terrifying thing he had ever experienced. The grief was a physical, burning agony, overwhelming the ingrained terror of his PTSD. The fragile mental fortress Kai had built in Oakhaven collapsed entirely. He had to follow. He wasn't thinking about safety or reality, he was thinking only of Rex. Clutching the heavy wrench, Kai took the first dreadful step onto the basalt surface of the viaduct. The stone beneath his feet was slick with unnatural frost. He ran, driving himself toward the point of erasure, his breath ragged in the cold. As he closed in on the 0 point, the air seemed to thicken exponentially. It was like running through deep water. The metallic scent was overwhelming, searing his lungs. The density of the time frost grew so profound that Kai couldn't see his own feet. Then, the threshold. Reaching the exact midpoint, Kai hit an invisible wall, not of stone, but of resistant energy. It felt like walking headlong into a massive, charged capacitor. A blinding white light erupted around him, accompanied by a sound that wasn't sound, but a searing, agonizing pressure in his eardrums, a high-pitched shriek of reality tearing itself apart. His body felt instantly wrong. He was simultaneously heavy and weightless, stretched taut like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. His skin crawled as if the fibers of his being were being rewoven. For a terrifying fraction of a second, he saw the world of Oakhaven, the trees, the grey sky, shiver, warp, and fold in on itself, replaced by dizzying kaleidoscope of purple, black, and crystalline blue. Then came the impact. Not a violent jolt, but a staggering, profound inversion. Kai stumbled, landing heavily on what felt like the same basalt, but different. The searing pressure in his head subsided, replaced by the ringing silence of a new, terrible reality. He opened his eyes. The familiar grey mist of Oakhaven was gone, replaced by a sight so violently contrary to physics and sanity that his entire existence seemed to recoil. He had crossed. He was no longer in the Pacific Northwest. The moment Kai recovered from the jarring transition, the viaduct beneath him had transformed. It was still recognizable as the bridge, but the ancient, dull basalt was now polished smooth, reflecting the strange, harsh light like obsidian glass. Massive veins of crystalline blue ice ran through the structure, not like decay, but like glowing internal arteries, pulsating faintly with an ethereal, cold luminescence. He stood on the threshold of Aethel, a world devoured by an impossible winter. Aethel was a study in static destruction. The world was rendered in violently contrasting hues, the sky was a deep, turbulent indigo, ripped open in places by slow-moving streaks of blinding, unstable green, and violet energy. Below, the landscape was a vista of frozen desperation. Trees stood as ghostly, skeletal towers, preserved and encased in thick, diamond-hard blue ice, their life force visibly drained. The air itself felt thin, sharp, and intensely dry, carrying a faint, ceaseless electric hum that vibrated in his teeth. Kai glanced at his watch, a rugged, purely mechanical device that had survived the dead zone's energy drain. The second hand was blurring, whipping around the dial at 3 times the normal speed. A wave of profound nausea hit him. Time here was accelerated, unstable. Weeks could pass in Aethel for mere hours in Oakhaven. Rex could be anywhere, or nowhere, and the urgency of returning home before his world moved past him became overwhelming. Before he could process the logistical nightmare, a sound sliced through the unnatural silence, the crunch of ice underfoot, approaching rapidly. He raised the heavy wrench defensively, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the electric hum of this new reality. Out of the towering, frozen forest emerged a figure who defied easy categorization. She was tall, agile, and moved with predatory grace. Her clothing was practical, yet ritualistic, dark, hardened leather and interlocking plates of scavenged metal. Her face was striking, defined by an untamed, fierce beauty and eyes that burned with a startling, intelligent sapphire intensity. But the feature that stopped Kai's breath was the biological horror of her crown. Branching up from her temples were twin structures of iridescent, perfectly clear crystal, fused directly into her skull and extending like elaborate, icy horns. They were not decoration, they were living, integral parts of her anatomy, catching and refracting the harsh skylight. She didn't hesitate. She launched forward with the coiled energy of a striking viper, a crudely fashioned but razor-sharp axe, its head made of what looked like the same glowing blue crystal, leveled at Kai's neck. Kai reacted on pure muscle memory, ducking the blow and using the weight of his wrench to deflect the momentum. The crystalline axe glanced off the wrench with a screech of shearing metal. "Jan deep," she spat, her voice raw and demanding, though her accent was thick and strange. "You reek of the rift. Clockwork Legion dog." She pressed the attack relentlessly, forcing Kai backward onto the unstable ice of the viaduct. He was a combat engineer, skilled in demolition and tactical retreat, not close-quarters combat against this feral, agile warrior. "Wait! I don't know what you're talking about. I'm looking for my dog, Rex." Kai yelled, struggling to keep his balance on the slick surface. The mention of the dog seemed to momentarily stall her fury, her eyes flicking across his face, searching for deception. "A dog," she scoffed, but the ferocity in her posture eased fractionally. She lowered the crystalline axe, though kept her body tense. "You crossed the threshold for a common animal? Only fools or Legion scouting parties attempt the crossing during a full-time frost." "Time frost," Kai repeated, the name resonating perfectly with the cold, distorted terror he had just experienced. "It is the ebb of the etheric tide," she explained, her voice hardening again, suspicion immediately returning. "The one condition that destabilizes the viaduct enough to allow passage. No one from your side, the outer world, has made this crossing in living memory. Your appearance, civilian, is an ancient event. It brings catastrophe." She circled him slowly, her crystal horns shimmering. "Who are you? And why has the Legion sent such a crude, soft instrument through the gate?" Kai, breathless and aching, instinctively straightened his crumpled jacket, attempting to reclaim some semblance of authority in this alien hellscape. "My name is Kai. I followed Rex. And if this Legioner you speak of is responsible for whatever this place is, then I'm their worst enemy. I just want to find my way back." The warrior, for she was certainly a warrior, stared at the wrench in his hand, then at the frantic pulse in his throat. A spark of calculation entered her sapphire eyes. "No," she said, definitively. "You do not simply go back. The crossing takes what it requires. And your appearance here, at this precise moment, means you are no longer a visitor. You are now the catalyst for Aethel's final collapse. Your world is in grave danger because you crossed that bridge. The immediate, desperate necessity of survival forged an uneasy, volatile alliance." The warrior introduced herself as Lyra, a member of the Sylvan Guard, the last remnants of Aethel's defenders. She quickly ascertained that Kai's utility lay not in his fighting prowess, but in the analytical, dispassionate logic of his engineering mind, a skill set utterly foreign in this frozen world of instinct and magic. "The Clockwork Legion sees organic life as inefficiency," Lyra explained as they retreated deep into the shelter of a hollow, ice-encased megatree, the only natural defense against the harsh energy winds. "They are machine fanatics. Everything must be stabilized, synchronized, and locked down." The Legion was Kai's worst nightmare realized, the antithesis of his pursuit of silence and calm. They weren't autonomous robots, they were men and women twisted and transformed by their absolute devotion to technology. Lyra showed him blurred images, crude sketches made on ice-scraped slate, of the enemy, figures clad in heavy, bolted-on armor, their faces obscured by ghastly, expressionless metal masks, their limbs replaced by steam-driven pistons and razor-sharp blades. They moved with a terrifying, jerky precision, driven by an internal mechanism that seemed to generate constant, low, rhythmic grinding, a sound that made Kai's muscles tense in anticipation of a sonic blast. Lyra's greatest fear was the man who led their conquest, Apostle Gearhart. Gearhart is no mere soldier. He is a prophet of synchronization, Lyra whispered, the ice horns on her head catching the dim light. He was once one of us, before the corruption. Now, he believes Aethel's unstable, fluctuating nature, our very existence, is an affront to order. He calls this world a chaos unbound, and he intends to bring absolute stability. Gearhart's current obsession was the viaduct. He understood its function as a temporary, unstable dimensional gate. Kai, using his structural analysis skills, immediately recognized the strategic layout Lyra described. The Legion had erected massive, makeshift mining rigs near the viaduct, focusing on deep, destructive excavation into the basalt and surrounding ice. They weren't mining for precious minerals, they were extracting the glowing, pulsing blue crystal, the etheric crystals, that formed the veins of the viaduct and the ice trees. The crystals are the blood of Aethel, Lyra stressed. They hold the dimensional resonance. The time frost allows a temporary tear, yes, but Gearhart is harvesting the crystals to forge an anchor. The horrifying truth crystallized for Kai, Gearhart's ultimate objective was not simply to destroy Aethel, but to weaponize the viaduct. By injecting massive amounts of harvested etheric energy into the 0 point, Gearhart sought to permanently lock the gate open. This would create an eternal, fixed rift between Aethel and Oakhaven, Kai's world. They crave your world's energy, Lyra said grimly. They call it a pure potential. Gearhart believes your reality, untouched by Aethel's etheric fluctuations, is the fuel needed to power his legion indefinitely. He wants a stable bridgehead, and Oakhaven is the target. The stakes instantly vaulted past the personal tragedy of losing Rex. Kai's silent, isolated refuge was about to become the epicenter of an interdimensional invasion. He had run from conflict, but by chasing his dog, he had landed squarely in the middle of a war for two realities. So, the viaduct isn't just a bridge, Kai summarized, running a hand over the frozen, cracked stone of their shelter. It's a natural weak point, a membrane. And Gearhart is performing surgery with dynamite. Lyra nodded, a flicker of appreciation in her sapphire eyes for his immediate grasp of the physics. He must be stopped. But our forces are scattered, and his machines are impervious to our conventional weapons. We need to hit his supply lines, disrupt the mining, and delay the stabilization ritual. Kai swallowed, his fear momentarily overshadowed by the engineer's instinct to solve an urgent problem. He thought of the heavy machinery he'd worked on, the stress points in steel, the vulnerabilities in any large-scale operation. If the machines run on steam or pneumatic pressure, they have critical failure points. Heat transfer, stress fractures, pressure vessel flaws, Kai muttered, already sketching diagrams in the snow with his wrench. We can't fight them head-on, but we can cause catastrophic operational failure. Show me the primary mining rigs. Show me the path to the viaduct. The partnership was sealed not with trust, but with mutual, cold necessity. Kai needed to destroy the bridge to save his home, Lyra needed his knowledge to save hers. The attack plan was suicidal, requiring precision, speed, and absolute silence, a paradoxical combination in a world dominated by grinding machines. Kai, now dressed in spare, surprisingly warm hide armor provided by Lyra, focused entirely on the mechanics of destruction. Lyra led him through the treacherous, frozen landscape towards the primary mining cluster, the air growing thick with the choking stench of burning coal and oil, Gearhart's makeshift fuel source against Aethel's impossible cold. Kai identified the Legion's fatal flaw, a reliance on centralized, massive steam generators to power the crystal extraction rigs. He devised a plan to cripple the entire operation by focusing on the pressure points. The generators needed vast amounts of water, sourced from the melted ice. We don't hit the machines. We hit the cooling system and the pressure relief valves, Kai explained, pointing to a diagram etched in ice. A catastrophic steam leak will blind them, and an uncontrolled pressure surge will destroy the internal workings without explosives. The midnight assault, under the strange indigo sky, was a desperate, harrowing dash. Lyra moved like a phantom, her crystal axe silently dispatching the few organic Legion guards who hadn't fully submitted to the cybernetic transformation. Kai, meanwhile, had to face the true mechanical horrors. One moment, he was navigating frozen routes, the next, he was directly beneath a towering, six-legged drilling rig that hissed and ground, its metal appendages tearing into the basalt. The sound of its operation was a deafening, metallic chorus that grated on Kai's nerves, forcing him to channel the pain into focus. He used his wrench and his wits. Climbing the rig's icy lattice, dodging scalding steam vents, he found the primary intake hose, connecting the machine to a melted ice runoff pool. Using the wrench like a massive spike, he punctured the reinforced piping, then jammed a piece of scrap metal into the pressure valve hinge. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. Water, instead of cooling the system, gushed out, freezing instantly on the hot metal casing, creating a brittle shell. The pressure valve, unable to relieve the internal stress, groaned audibly. The rig shuddered violently, its rhythmic grinding accelerating into a desperate, dying screech before the pressure vessel ruptured with a deafening, final whoosh of steam and metal shrapnel. They repeated the act across 3 key mining sites. The destruction was immediate and total. The ground shook as the massive rigs collapsed into smoking, frozen wrecks. The Sylvan Guard had won a crushing, tactical victory. But success was fleeting. As the last rig buckled, the electrical hum in the air intensified violently. Lyra screamed a warning, pulling Kai hard into the shadow of a frozen ridge. A figure emerged onto the viaduct, silhouetted against the indigo sky. Apostle Gearhart. He hadn't been defeated, he had been baited. Gearhart had anticipated the attack on the outlying rigs, viewing them as expendable. His true target was the viaduct itself, and his true weapon was already operational. Gearhart stood next to a massive, pyramid-shaped contraption glowing intensely red through the surrounding time frost, a colossal thermal generator. This wasn't for mining, it was for climate control. They seek the cold for stabilization. Lyra gasped, horrified. The time frost must be present for the bridge to close. Kai watched, his blood turning to ice. Gearhart raised a metallic fist, and the generator roared to life, spewing waves of scorching, unnatural heat into the highly unstable dimensional rift. The ice around the viaduct groaned, then began to weep. The crystalline blue veins that ran through the basalt structure started to turn opaque, melting rapidly. Gearhart's voice, amplified and distorted by his metal mask, boomed across the gorge, cold and triumphant. You fought well, little Sylvan. But the gateway requires only heat to solidify the passage. Once the ice is gone, the portal is forever fixed. The bridge was visibly dissolving. The delicate balance that allowed the temporary opening and closing of the dimensional rift, the prerequisite of the time frost, was being deliberately, violently destroyed by heat. Run, Kai! We must retreat! Lyra commanded, dragging him away from the scorching heat radiating from the viaduct. They ran back towards the depths of Aethel. But Kai stopped at the highest frozen ridge, looking back at the structure that represented his only path home. The viaduct was rapidly losing its crystalline glow, becoming a slick, wet black ruin under the generator's scorching heat. A cold, agonizing realization settled in his gut, heavier than any steam engine. Gearhart had sealed the path. The time frost condition, the key to the gate, was being systematically eliminated. The door wasn't just closing, it was being welded shut from the inside, ensuring that when it finally opened again, it would be permanent, and facing the wrong direction. Kai watched the rising steam, the vapor that was not the time frost but simply evaporated water. He was trapped. He was utterly, finally stuck in Aethel. As Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, urging him onward, Kai knew his life in the outer world was over. He was now, irrevocably, one of the Sylvan Guard. The months that followed in Aethel passed in a desperate blur. For Kai's nervous system, Aethel was a slow-motion torture chamber. He quickly learned that while the sound of the Legion's machinery was agonizing, the silence of Aethel's vast, frozen forests was equally terrifying, a static, deep silence that felt like the world was holding its breath before a final, shattering exhale. Based on the wildly accelerated mechanics of Aethel's time flow, Lyra calculated that only a few agonizing weeks, perhaps less, had passed in Oakhaven. His absence was noticeable, but not yet catastrophic. This time discrepancy became Kai's constant, harrowing companion, with the knowledge that the people he cared for were continuing their lives unaware, while he was aging and fighting a hopeless war in a forgotten reality. Kai became indispensable to the Sylvan Guard. He used his knowledge of thermodynamics and stress mechanics to construct primitive but effective defenses, traps targeting the Legion's joints, steam-powered pressure cookers rigged as explosive decoys, and analysis that predicted the Legion's movements with uncanny precision. In this shared crucible of war and survival, Kai and Lyra found an aching, desperate closeness. Lyra represented the fierce, unyielding spirit of a world refusing to die, Kai, the analytical mind that offered practical methods for survival. Their initial suspicion dissolved into mutual respect, and then, inevitably, into a profound, shared despair. In Aethel, there were no soft places, no comfort. Their love was a fierce, protective flame in the heart of a cosmic freezer, a desperate acknowledgement of life and warmth against the backdrop of total extinction. Lyra, with her strange crystal horns and warrior soul, found an unexpected resonance with Kai's quiet intensity and his deep, haunting sadness. It was the love of two people fighting for the last sliver of hope, knowing that hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. But even the intensity of their connection could not halt the inevitable. The situation grew dramatically worse. Gearhart, having permanently disabled the time frost condition with his thermal generator, shifted his focus from mining to capture. He began aggressively hunting the Sylvan Guard, leading to several brutal skirmishes and the agonizing loss of key members. Lyra brought the grim news back one frigid night. Gearhart had successfully captured nearly a dozen Sylvan Guard, including their elder, the keeper of Aethel's most ancient knowledge. "He is not interrogating them," Lyra whispered, her voice tight with terror, the crystalline horns cold against Kai's cheek. "He is preparing them for the viaduct." Kai pressed her for details, forcing her to articulate the horror. Gearhart was not repairing the mining rigs, he was constructing a vast, centralized mechanism at the 0 point. He planned to conduct a ritual of mass sacrifice. He believes that the sudden, concentrated release of raw energy, the agony, the terror, the life force of the Sylvan Guard, will create a massive, chaotic shockwave, Lyra explained, her eyes mirroring the fractured light of the indigo sky. "He doesn't need the time frost anymore. He plans to force the dimensional gate to tear open permanently, regardless of the etheric conditions, providing an eternal, stable pathway to your world." The timeline was terrifyingly short. Gearhart planned a ritual for the next phase of the moon, a rare, eerie celestial event in Aethel known as the Blood Eclipse, a day away. Kai's initial escape window had been slammed shut, only to be pried open again by the impending, catastrophic terror of Gearhart's final gambit. If the gate opened this way, Oakhaven would not be invaded by a scouting party, it would be instantly overwhelmed by a permanent, highly volatile rift and a relentless, stabilized legion. The blood eclipse was hours away, bathing Aethel in a sickly, pulsating maroon light. Lyra and Kai stood in the makeshift war room, the crushing weight of their final decision pressing down on them. Kai, his mind racing through endless variables, presented the only theoretical solution for escape and survival. If we could somehow restart the time frost, restore the natural equilibrium, the gate might open momentarily, just enough for us to cross back and sound the alarm. Lyra shook her head sadly. "Even if you could cross, they would follow. You would only lead the Legion directly to the heart of your world, creating the bridge for them. They would track your resonance." The agonizing, cold realization hit Kai, and to save Aethel, he had to stay. To save Oakhaven, he had to leave, but only under the most destructive conditions possible. His survival was contingent on the total sacrifice of the world he had fought for, and the woman he loved. Lyra, understanding the dimensional mechanics better than anyone, articulated the horrifying necessity. "You must not simply return, Kai," she said, her voice steady despite the despair in her eyes. "You must return to destroy the viaduct itself. From your side. You must strike it where it is strongest, at the 0 point, and shatter the stone, shattering the dimensional membrane with it." Destroying the viaduct from the outer world would mean a localized cataclysm, but it was the only way to prevent the interdimensional tear. It would be a permanent sealing of the gate, preventing any future travel between the worlds. "How? I can't even get electronic explosives to function near the 0 point, Kai argued, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Lyra reached into a heavy pouch made of carved wooden furs, pulling out the most terrifying object Kai had ever seen, a massive, uncut etheric crystal shard. It pulsed with a dangerous, chaotic sapphire light, vibrating against her palm with immense latent energy. It was raw, dimensional power, painfully cold to the touch. "This shard is too unstable to use in Aethel," Lyra explained, her breathing shallow. "It is saturated with enough resonance to destabilize a mountain. But near the viaduct, within the electrical dead zone, it will reach critical mass. It is a time bomb. A single, focused blow will cause a resonance surge that will annihilate the 0 point, imploding the dimensional fabric." She held the shard out. It was heavy, warm, and intensely painful against Kai's skin. It was the weapon of total destruction, his final act of betrayal against Aethel. You must take the shard and wait until the moment the gate is most stressed, when Gearhart begins his ritual. Then you strike the 0 point. You will seal Aethel away forever. The farewell was swift, brutal, and utterly final. There was no time for lengthy promises, only the aching reality of their love and loss. Go back, Kai, Lyra commanded, her sapphire eyes glistening. Save your silent world. Your life, your future, must be the monument to Aethel's sacrifice. If Oakhaven is safe, then our resistance here was not in vain. He clutched the heavy, pulsing shard. The cold of the crystal seemed to penetrate his bones, a constant reminder of the world he was about to abandon. He nodded, the agony of the choice eclipsing all his previous fears. He would save his world, even if it meant burying the love he found in this one. The blood eclipse climaxed, bathing the frozen world in a horrific, bloody light. Lyra and Kai positioned themselves near the viaduct. Gearhart's ritual had begun. The time frost had returned, faintly, weakly, drawn by the chaotic energy of the ritual and the massive strain on the dimensional fabric. It was just a thin, shimmering band of white fog hovering at the 0 point, a fleeting, unstable opportunity. Now! It is the weakest point! Lyra shouted, her voice thin against the rising chaotic energy. They burst onto the viaduct. The bridge was now a nightmare landscape of steam, melted ice, and pulsating crystalline energy. At the 0 point, Gearhart stood tall amidst his core legionnaires, the captured Sylvan Guard chained to the generator mechanism, their silent terror feeding the growing power surge. The spy returns! Gearhart's metallic voice boomed, turning his attention away from the ritual. I knew your sentimental weakness would draw you out, Sylvan. Lyra engaged Gearhart immediately, her crystal axe a blur of desperate movement against the Apostle's heavy, steam-powered limbs. Kai ran straight for the 0 point, dodging legionnaires, their piston-driven legs grinding the basalt. He reached the generator, raising the heavy, glowing etheric shard, aiming for the mechanism's core. No, Kai! The gate! Lyra screamed through her fierce battle with Gearhart. Kai realized his mistake. If he struck the generator, the resulting explosion would destroy Lyra. He pivoted instantly, abandoning the generator, rushing instead toward the faint line of time frost hovering above the 0 point, the exact atmospheric instability that had brought him here. Lyra, seeing his intent, pushed Gearhart back with a ferocious, suicidal lunge, drawing the Apostle and his inner guard away from the threshold just long enough. Kai slammed the etheric shard, its chaotic energy screaming against the electric hum, deep into the exact center of the viaduct's basalt structure. The impact did not detonate it, but the sudden physical stress against the highly energized 0 point caused a blinding, immediate rift to tear open, a vortex of crystalline blue and white chaos, far larger and more violent than his first crossing. He didn't hesitate, throwing his body into the blinding portal, the wrench still gripped tightly in his hand. He emerged not on solid ground, but suspended in the dizzying, nauseating middle of the viaduct, back in the silent, grey world of Oakhaven. The etheric shard was still embedded in the stone at the 0 point, now glowing with a malevolent, pulsating intensity. The dimensional rift, destabilized by the shard, was weeping unstable energy, a raw, volatile tear in reality. Kai was back, but the threat was right behind him. He could hear, faintly, the metallic, grinding screams of the legionnaires trying to follow. He dragged himself onto the arch, his body numb with cold and... The silence of Oakhaven was a predator. It was the specific, oppressive quiet of a dead logging town nestled deep in the sodden, shadow-choked valleys of the Pacific Northwest. For Kai, a man whose mind was a ruin of shrapnel and suppressed screams, a veteran suffering from debilitating PTSD, this terminal quiet was the only balm. Every metallic clang, every sudden shout, every phantom echo of the battlefield was a spike driven through his skull. Here, only the damp drip of condensation and the occasional distant cry of a raptor interrupted the profound stillness. He lived in isolation, his sole, essential companion being Rex, an enormous, shambling mastiff whose soft padding footsteps never jarred the fragile peace Kai desperately needed. Rex was his early warning system, his silent protector, and the only creature whose presence didn't feel like a judgmental intrusion. One dreary afternoon, Rex led him. The dog had an unnatural obsession with the northern ridge, a place most locals superstitiously avoided. They followed the overgrown logging tracks until they reached the structure that dominated Oakhaven's folklore, the Aetheric Viaduct. It was a monstrosity of engineering and myth. The bridge did not look built, it looked grown. Constructed of cyclopean blocks of black basalt, slick with eons of green moss and draped in perpetually swelling mist, it spanned a chasm so deep the bottom was an abstract concept. The architecture was anachronistic, part brutalist railway bridge, part forgotten Gothic cathedral, its origins lost long before Oakhaven was founded. It seemed to defy local geology, resting on foundations that appeared impossibly shallow yet unshakable. Kai approached cautiously, Rex padding ahead. His engineering background, which still stubbornly functioned despite the wreckage of his psyche, compelled him to investigate. He pulled out the only piece of modern technology he dared carry, a heavily shielded, low-powered electromagnetic field sensor. As he stepped onto the first ancient stone block, the sensor died. Not slowly, not flickering, but instantly, as if the battery had been physically ripped out. Kai tried again, replacing the battery, moving 10 feet forward, and powering up the device. The readout was instantaneous and terrifying, 0. Not just local interference, but a complete, perfect vacuum of electromagnetic energy. Every radio wave, every GPS signal, every whisper of digital data was swallowed by the structure itself. It wasn't an incident, it was a physical law, unique to the viaduct. This was the first undeniable proof that the silence was not merely geographical, but unnatural. Rex whined softly, pausing precisely at the absolute center of the span, the point the locals called the A0 point. Standing next to him, Kai felt a cold that transcended the damp air. It was a sterile, cutting cold, like the chill of outer space, pressing against his skin. It wasn't just the temperature, it was a profound, instinctual unease. He felt watched, not by a physical presence, but by the bridge itself, as if the basalt held its breath, waiting. He knew, with the chilling certainty of a man who has seen too much, that this ancient artifact was not just a relic of stone and mortar. It was a doorway, and something was stirring on the other side. The silence shattered 3 weeks later, replaced by an infinitely more alarming phenomenon. It started with the cold. Not the predictable chill of an approaching Pacific storm, but a sudden, violent drop in temperature that cracked the window glass in Kai's cabin. Then came the fog, the temporal frost. It was a mist unlike any meteorological event he had ever witnessed. It was thick, incandescent white, clinging low to the ground and boiling around the viaduct. It didn't just obscure light, it warped it, twisting the sunlight into strange, prismatic halos. The air itself was dense and metallic. Kai tasted ozone and the sharp, nauseating scent of superheated, molten copper, though there was no fire nearby. The soundscape was equally distorted, the world became muffled, as if wrapped in cotton wool. He knew, instinctively, that this condition was the key, the specific atmospheric trigger he had subconsciously anticipated. Driven by a terrible curiosity and pulled by Rex's frantic energy, Kai rushed back to the viaduct. As they neared the ancient span, Kai saw the newest abnormality. Scored deep into the black basalt, slicing through the millennia of moss, were fresh burn marks. They were sharp, dark, and fractal, like the strike pattern of powerful lightning, yet they smelled intensely of that strange ozone and metallic tang. They looked less like damage and more like a recent, violent incision into the fabric of the bridge itself. Rex didn't wait. The dog was trembling, but his focus was absolute. He bolted onto the viaduct, navigating the shifting, glowing mist with urgency. "Rex, wait! Stop!" Kai yelled, but his voice was swallowed, dying instantly in the thick air. Rex reached the 0 point. It happened in the compressed span of a single heartbeat. Rex paused, turning back toward Kai, his eyes wide with a sudden, overwhelming confusion. He didn't whine, he didn't bark, he didn't even drop. One instant, the vast, lumbering form of the mastiff was silhouetted against the swirling white mist, the next, he was gone. There was no pop, no flash, no sound of impact or struggling breath. Just an instantaneous, perfect absence. The space where Rex had stood was instantly filled by a whip of penetrating, bitter cold air that struck Kai's face like a physical blow. The horror of combat, the fear of loud noises, the paralysis of his PTSD, all were instantly annihilated by the primal, gut-wrenching terror of loss. Rex was gone. vanished into thin air, erased by the very silence Kai had sought refuge in. He didn't think, he reacted. He sprinted onto the bridge, crossing the gap between safety and the unknown in a reckless, blinding dash. As he crossed the exact latitude where Rex had disappeared, the physical reality of the transition slammed into him. It wasn't a peaceful fade. It was a violent, shearing collision. He felt his body stretch and twist, an unbearable pressure building behind his eyes and across his ribs, like being squeezed through the eye of a needle made of cold steel. The sensation lasted an agonizing fraction of a second, a grinding, tearing noise in his inner ear, a flash of purple-black light, and then, it was over. The cold air dissipated, replaced by a sudden, intense heat that felt dry and foreign. The soundlessness was replaced by a low, persistent thrumming, a deep resonant chord that vibrated through the basalt beneath his feet. Kai stumbled, collapsing to his knees. When he opened his eyes, Oakhaven was gone. The world had been replaced. The viaduct was no longer a structure of age and decay, it was a monument to impossible science. The basalt beneath Kai's hands was now polished, obsidian smooth, and interlaced with brilliant veins of glowing, cobalt blue crystal that pulsed with the low, resonant hum. The moss was gone, replaced by a fine, perpetual layer of frost that did not melt under the ambient heat. This was the Aetheric Viaduct in its true state, a functional gateway, humming with incomprehensible power. Kai looked up, struggling to breathe the thin, metallic-tasting air. He was standing on the precipice of Aethel, a vista of horrifying, sublime despair. The world was bathed in a sickly, ethereal light cast by a purple charcoal sky that appeared constantly strained and torn by streaks of unstable, incandescent green energy. Color seemed to have been actively bleached or distorted. The trees that lined the canyon were not merely dormant but violently crystallized, encased in thick, skeletal sheets of blue-white ice, yet somehow retaining a petrified, twisted vitality. The ground was rugged and fractured, coated in dust that seemed to shimmer with trapped light. It was a world frozen in a state of agonizing, accelerated decay. Kai quickly oriented himself, scanning the sky for the sun. The shadows cast by the glowing crystals were sharp and moved far too quickly. Time here was unstable, running at a frightening clip compared to the gentle, slow crawl of Oakhaven. His gut twisted with immediate dread. If hours here equated to only minutes back home, the gap he had left in his reality was already dangerously stretched. He gripped the empty space where Rex had been, his engineer's mind desperately trying to rationalize the impossible. "You look lost, spy." The voice was rough, melodic, and edged with sharp danger. Kai whipped around, ignoring the flare of pain in his joints. Standing barely 30 feet away, balanced effortlessly on a pillar of sheer, crystal-sheathed rock, was a figure that defied any biological classification he knew. She was tall, built with the lean, coiled strength of a hunter. Her clothing was patchwork armor crafted from thick leather, metal scraps, and segments of glowing blue crystal, suggesting a deep understanding of this bizarre environment. Her eyes were piercing, the color of raw amber. But it was her head that seized Kai's attention with paralyzing fear. Rising from her temples, arching back and integrating seamlessly into the crown of her skull, were enormous, branching structures. They were neither bone nor wood, but intricate, organic-looking crystalline antlers, catching the unstable light and casting complex, shifting patterns across her face. The sight was beautiful, majestic, and utterly alien. She held a wicked, serrated bow drawn taut, the arrow, tipped with a fragment of the same blue crystal, aimed squarely at his chest. "Aetheric signature is faint, the uniform is wrong, and you lack the proper scars," she analyzed, her voice tight with suspicion. "Who are you, and which clockwork pit did they drag you out of? Answer, or I'll use you to test the tensile strength of the viaduct's integrity field." Kai raised his hands, focusing intensely on keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline flood. "My name is Kai. I'm not a spy. I followed my dog, he disappeared right here." She snorted, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "A dog? A sentimental gesture for an infiltrating vanguard. Only the Clockwork Legion speaks of a disappearance when they mean reallocation." Her bow remained steady. "The viaduct is a membrane, not an entrance for pets. Only the worst kind of catastrophe, the temporal frost, makes it permeable. Your people haven't dared open this door in centuries." Kai desperately tried to process the avalanche of information: Legion, reallocation, centuries. My people? I came from Oakhaven. It's just a dead town in the woods. Oakhaven, she spat the name out as if it were rusty iron. You mean the Silent Realm, the untouched resource. The world that hasn't been corrupted by the sickness. Your arrival is not an accident, Kai of Oakhaven. It is the end of the long peace. She leaped down from the pillar with terrifying grace, closing the distance in 3 long strides. The crystallized antlers seemed to hum faintly. I am Lyra, of the Sylvan Guard. And while I want to kill you for breaching the threshold and jeopardizing everything we fight for, you are a walking catastrophe that must be contained. The viaduct is now open, even if momentarily. If you are not a scout, then you are bait. She lowered the bow slightly, though the danger had not lessened. Tell me everything about the moment you crossed. Quickly. The ice is already melting, and the Legion will know what caused this rupture. Kai realized the profound danger he was in. He wasn't just trapped, his unintentional intrusion had thrown open a fragile, invisible door, inviting disaster into 2 realities. And the fierce, crystalline woman before him, poised between life and death, was the only key to understanding the nightmare he had stumbled into. The air was sharp and unforgiving, smelling of ozone and frozen earth. Lyra dragged Kai deeper into the crystalline ruins, away from the viaduct. The immediate shock of losing Rex was being rapidly replaced by the primal urge to survive and the chilling realization that Lyra, the hostile creature who nearly ran him through, was his only key to navigating this frozen hell. Lyra was mercilessly pragmatic. She bound a thick, mossy vine around Kai's wrist, securing him to her own belt, not as a measure of comfort, but of control. You are soft, she spat, her voice a low, gravelly whisper that cut through the silence of Aethel. Etheric energies weaken men quickly. You smell of their outside. You are a liability. Kai, still reeling from the violent introduction to this new reality, rubbed the throbbing point on his jaw where Lyra's blade had connected. I'm an engineer, Lyra. I understand thermodynamics and structural integrity. Your enemies are machines. If you want to fight them, you need someone who knows how they fail. This statement struck a nerve. Lyra stopped abruptly, her gaze, intense and the color of glacial ice, searching Kai's face. She needed to understand why the Legion was interested in him, but more importantly, she recognized the utility in his panic-stricken logic. The Sylvan Guard were warriors of instinct and nature. They understood the entropy of ice and the rhythm of the forest. They did not understand the cold, mathematical precision of the Clockwork Legion. The machines, they defy natural failure, she said, finally agreeing with the engineering assessment. They do not rust. They do not tire. But if you can read the rhythm of their power cores, if you can find the weakness in the gear, then perhaps the risk of keeping you alive is worth the cost. Their partnership was forged not in trust, but in a desperate calculus of survival. Kai saw in Lyra a fierce, albeit terrifying, protector. Lyra saw in Kai a unique, volatile weapon against the tyranny of steel. As they moved toward a hidden grotto carved deep into a ridge of purple ice, Lyra explained the enemy, the Clockwork Legion. They are not just automatons, Lyra warned, pointing toward a distant column of steam rising near the central spire of the bridge. They were once the people of Aethel, scholars, builders, priests. They succumbed to the belief that the only way to escape the decay of our world was to become the machine. The Legion represented a true form of biomechanical horror. They wore heavy plating of iron and brass, but the metal wasn't armor, it was integrated into their very flesh. Their limbs were replaced by steam-driven pistons that hissed and pumped with terrifying mechanical respiration. Their heads were encased in smooth, metallic masks that denied any hint of human expression, no eyes, no mouths, only arrays of optical sensors or fine, etched ventilation slits. Lyra shuddered. The masks are the worst. They call them the rare visages of order. They seal their faces inside, believing that human emotion is the source of all chaos. They feel nothing, they stop for nothing, and their only driving force is the mandate of their apostle. A low, resonant thrum echoed through the glacial canyons. It was the sound of heavy industry operating in a dead world, the grinding of massive gears, the rhythmic clang of hammers, and the steady, low-frequency hum of etheric energy being violently contained. It was an auditory assault that grated on Kai's sensitive nerves, yet, paradoxically, it was a structured sound, one that his mind, accustomed to cataloging military noises, could process better than the absolute silence of Oakhaven. The mandate Lyra spoke of belonged to one man, Apostle Gearhart. Gearhart was the architect of this mechanical plague, the one who twisted Aethel's desperation into religious fervor. He was seldom seen, operating from a massive, mobile command platform deep within the Legion's fortified territory, but his presence was inescapable. Gearhart is no mere general. He is a prophet of the cold equation, Lyra whispered, her hand instinctively touching the hilt of her obsidian-hilt blade. He views Aethel as a failed experiment, a world of too much entropy, too much nature, too much freedom. Gearhart's appearance was as disturbing as his ideology. He did not hide behind a simple visage, his body was the pinnacle of mechanical integration. One of his arms, from the shoulder down, was a shimmering scaffold of blue-black metal and faintly glowing etheric crystal circuitry. This crystalline arm did not merely replace his biological limb, it seemed to think autonomously, tracing calculations in the air with silent, electric arcs. His eyes, the only part of his face still recognizably human, were cold, calculating grey, framed by ornate brass goggles that magnified his gaze, giving him an unnerving, hyper-aware look. He believes his mission is to stabilize Aethel, Lyra continued. To bring perfect, unchanging order to all realities. He calls this their great clockwork mandate. And for that, he needs your world. Lyra led Kai to a high vantage point overlooking the central mining operations. Below, massive drilling rigs, powered by pulsing steam and humming dynamos, tore into the frozen earth. They were harvesting the raw etheric crystals, shards of solidified dimensional energy. The crystals are the key, Lyra explained, pointing to the bridge, the Aetheric Viaduct. That bridge is a living thing, a temporary wound between dimensions. It opens and closes based on extreme fluctuations, like the swung geothoid that pulled you through. Kai remembered his initial tests in Oakhaven, the dead zone, the complete void of electronic energy at the bridge's center. The point you stood on, the center point, we call it the 0 point. It is the hinge. Gearhart doesn't just want to mine the crystals for power. He wants to use them to anchor the 0 point. He wants to turn the temporary wound into a gaping, permanent fracture. The stakes became chillingly clear. If Gearhart succeeded, the viaduct would never close. The unstable, energy-draining reality of Aethel would bleed irreversibly into Kai's world. But why Oakhaven? Why the invasion? Kai asked, the engineer struggling to grasp the geopolitical motivation of a zealot. Lyra's voice dropped to a level of profound despair. Aethel is dying. The dimensional instability means our energy sources are exhausted, corrupted, or volatile. But your world, the outside, it is pure energy. Untapped, boundless, and most importantly, stable. Gearhart calls it the virgin engine. He intends to lock the gate, invade, and feast on the limitless power of your reality until Aethel is stabilized, or until both worlds are consumed. Kai looked down at the Clockwork Legion, the grinding, unstoppable, and emotionless engine of destruction. He was no longer just a man suffering from PTSD seeking peace, he was a spy, an engineer, and the reluctant savior of his own world, trapped with a ferocious warrior in a dying dimension designed by a prophet of mechanical despair. The fragile truce between them had just been cemented by a mutual, catastrophic threat. They had to stop Gearhart before the invasion became permanent. The raid, a fury of the frost. Content reserved for future sections. The silence of Oakhaven wasn't peace, it was the chilling, suffocating absence of sound that Kai sought desperately. This dying lumber town, nestled deep in the sodden, shadow-choked valleys of the Pacific Northwest, was his self-imposed exile. For Kai, a former combat engineer haunted by the neurological shrapnel of post-traumatic stress disorder, noise was physical agony, a sudden siren, a dropped pan, even the wind whistling wrong could trigger the searing flash of a phantom IED detonation. Oakhaven, with its moss-eaten timber mills and perpetually damp air, offered only the gentle drip of condensation and the occasional mournful cry of an owl. His only companion was Rex, a massive, scarred German shepherd whose presence was an anchor against the auditory vertigo. Rex didn't judge the panic attacks, nor did he flinch when Kai instinctively ducked the sound of a distant logging truck. Their existence was a quiet ritual of survival, mapping the empty trails. It was Rex who led him to it, the Aetheric Viaduct. It was a nightmare in black basalt. The structure spanned a gorge so deep the river below was only a pale rumor. The bridge itself was an impossible architectural marvel, Gothic lines intersecting with ancient, unknown masonry, slick with tenacious green moss. It looked less built and more grown, a spine of black rock bridging two forgotten worlds. Kai approached it with the methodical caution of an engineer studying a failing structure. His first attempt to document the bridge confirmed the anomaly, a total electromagnetic death. Not interference, but negation. His military-grade compass spun erratically near the abutments and then ceased entirely at the halfway point. GPS, radio, and even the tiny electromagnetic current from his flashlight battery seemed to be absorbed into the rock. It was a physical impossibility, a localized physics failure. Kai mapped the dead zone, confirming it centered precisely over the deepest point of the gorge. Standing on the bridge's midpoint, the air was unnaturally cold, heavy with a silent pressure that settled on the lungs. The silence here was different from Oakhaven's natural quiet, it was manufactured, profound, as if the space itself were holding its breath. Rex whimpered low in his throat, a sound of profound anxiety, his hackles raised against an unseen threat. Kai felt the cold seep into his bones, a premonition, not of danger, but of a cosmic appointment he was late for. Something immense and terrible was waiting, just beyond the edge of his sensory perception. The change came abruptly, ushered in by time frost. It wasn't the usual, benign Pacific Northwest fog. This was a thick, blindingly white vapor that rolled in from the gorge, moving not like gas, but like a fluid, clinging to the viaduct's basalt surface. The air grew dense, difficult to breathe, saturated with the metallic tang of ozone and something sharper, like superheated copper. The fog seemed to devour light, distorting the world into vague, shifting shapes. Kai's senses, already hypersensitive, registered a deeper dread. He tested the viaduct again, his engineering curiosity overriding his fear. He found new, horrific evidence, fresh scars on the basalt. They were sharp, dark burn marks, looking less like natural lightning strikes and more like the scorching of extreme, focused heat, yet the odor was not smoke, but the strange, sterile scent of exotic chemicals. Rex, sensing the shift, became frantic. The dog bolted, heedless of Kai's command, driven by an instinct Kai couldn't comprehend. Rex charged onto the bridge, melting into the time frost. Kai yelled, his voice muffled by the thick air, the sound painfully dulling his ears. Rex hit the 0 point, the dead center of the electromagnetic void, and vanished. There was no sound. No bark, no yelp, no struggle. Just the abrupt, total cessation of mass. 1 second, the shadow of the dog was there, a dark shape against the luminous white frost. The next, the space was empty, marked only by a violent, penetrating draft of cold air that felt less like wind and more like the vacuum of space. The trauma of the silence was worse than any detonation. Rex, his anchor, was gone. Grief and a searing, protective rage overcame the conditioning of his PTSD. Kai clutched the useless electronic gear in his pocket and stepped onto the viaduct. He walked toward the midpoint, the time frost wrapping around him like a shroud. As he crossed the threshold of the 0 point, the silence shattered, replaced by an internal cacophony. It wasn't sound, but sensation, a violent physical collision, as if his molecular structure had been violently stretched and then snapped back into place. Pain roared through him, not the familiar electrical pain of PTSD, but the grinding agony of reality rearranging itself. The air tore, the heavy smell of ozone intensified, and the muted, damp world of Oakhaven vanished, violently replaced by a universe of screaming blues and fractured light. The viaduct under his feet was no longer black, mossy basalt. It was a gleaming structure of highly polished, dark stone, riddled with veins of crystalline formations that pulsed with internal, unnerving blue light. The air was frigid, thin, and tasted of energized ice. Kai looked up, and the shock hit him like a physical blow. This was Aethel, a realm of magnificent, desolate despair. The landscape was a mosaic of frozen decay. Towering conifers stood petrified in sheets of blue ice, their needles fragmented into sparkling dust. The colors of this world were intensely saturated yet distorted, blues were searing, whites were sterile, and the shadows were deep purple-black. The sky was an unstable, bruised purple canvas, constantly torn by irregular, blinding streaks of raw, chaotic energy. He felt the subtle, terrifying shift in time immediately. The unstable energy fields accelerated his perception. Minutes here felt like hours. A horrifying calculation flashed through his mind. If the time differential was this extreme, the few hours he'd been missing in Oakhaven could translate to days, weeks, or months here. His anxiety twisted into a fear for the world he left behind. Before he could process the existential horror, a shadow moved with impossible speed. Jan deep. Spy. A figure lunged from the cover of a fractured crystal spire. She moved with the predatory grace of a wolf, armed with a bow carved from ice and sinew. This was Lyra. She was fierce, beautiful in a wild, hardened way, clad in layers of treated hides and worn armor. The most shocking detail was the crown of her head. A crystalline antlers, translucent blue and fiercely branched, emerged from her temples, catching the chaotic light. They seemed to be an organic part of her. Lyra's attack was instantaneous and lethal. Kai, reacting purely on ingrained military reflex, dodged the first icy arrow, throwing himself behind a glowing shard of viaduct stone. "Wait! I don't know where I am," he shouted, hands raised. "A likely lie, clockwork dog," she spat, her voice ringing with the cold clarity of breaking ice. "Your masters always send scouts before the Legion descends. You reek of the other side." She circled him, bow drawn taut. "Are you a surveyor for Gearhart? Looking for weaknesses in the Crystal Ward?" "Gearhart? I don't know any Gearhart. I'm Kai." "I was looking for my dog," he insisted, the desperation genuine. Lyra froze, her expression shifting from lethal aggression to calculating suspicion. She lowered the bow slightly, scrutinizing his clothes, modern, insulated, utterly alien to this frozen battlefield. "Your dog," she mocked, though a flicker of doubt crossed her eyes. "The 0 point does not permit pets. It only permits the most profound instability." She took a cautious step back. "You came through the time frost. That cold wave, it is the only condition that allows passage. It opens the tear. Your sudden, clumsy appearance is an event we had hoped never to see again. It means the stability of the viaduct is weakening. You bring ruin to Aethel, and if you remain, you will bring it to your own world." The fear gripping Kai sharpened into a terrifying focus. This place was real, the threat was immediate, and his crossing had not been an accident, but a disastrous sign of the bridge's failure. Lyra's immediate distrust of Kai remained palpable, a weapon drawn between them, but the existential threat of the Clockwork Legion forced a strained, pragmatic alliance. Lyra was the leader of the Sylvan Guard, Aethel's desperate, nature-attuned defenders. She quickly assessed Kai, not as a warrior, but as a tool. "We fight with spirit in the ice," Lyra explained, leading him through tunnels carved beneath the frozen roots of ancient, crystallized trees. "But they fight with calculation and endless metal. You, trespasser, understand their calculation." Kai, despite the jarring reality, confirmed her assessment. His knowledge of advanced structural engineering, metallurgy, and counterinsurgency tactics, skills utterly foreign to Aethel, was their only asymmetric advantage. Their relationship was established on a bedrock of mutual suspicion cemented by absolute necessity. The Clockwork Legion was the antithesis of Aethel's desperate life. They were a mechanical plague. They were not autonomous robots, that would have been merciful. They were people, Aethel's own, often defectors or those captured, transformed through crude, horrific surgical modification into relentless, tireless machines. Their skin was replaced by poorly cast iron plating, their faces obscured by unsettling, featureless metal masks that hinted at the vacant space behind them. They moved with the jerky, relentless efficiency of gear-driven nightmares, their silence, a mechanical hiss and grind, more terrifying than any roar. At the head of this horror was Apostle Gearhart. Gearhart was not merely a general, he was a priest of technology, a fanatic dedicated to the purification of Aethel. He was tall, encased in superior, gleaming brass armor, his mask etched with complex geometric patterns. He was the embodiment of cold calculation. Lyra relayed tales of his terrifying efficacy. Gearhart didn't care about casualties, he cared about data and structural stability. He viewed Aethel as a chaotic, messy system that needed to be locked down and stabilized, permanently brought under the dominion of his calculated order. "Gearhart believes in the perfect machine," Lyra said, her voice laced with venom. He despises the instability of the rift, the chaos of the time frost. He wants the gate to be a permanent, fixed structure. The true objective of the Legion, which Kai's engineering I confirmed, was terrifyingly simple and apocalyptic. They were mining the massive etheric crystals embedded in the rock around the viaduct. These crystals were the very structure of Aethel's unstable reality. Gearhart was using the harvested crystal energy not just for power, but to lock the viaduct in a permanently open state. His aim was to create a perpetual interdimensional breach, an eternal doorway. They sought to invade Oakhaven, Kai's world, because, to them, it represented an untapped source of pure, clean energy, free from the chaotic, decaying instability of Aethel. If Gearhart succeeded, Oakhaven would face a mechanized invasion it could never repel. Kai's desperate flight had brought the horror one step closer. The necessity of striking immediately was paramount. Lyra's scouts confirmed that the Legion was accelerating their crystalline harvest, draining Aethel's life force at an alarming rate. Kai spent a desperate, freezing day analyzing the schematics Lyra had pieced together from captured Legion patrols, crude drawings that nonetheless showed the stress points and power feeds of the crystalline harvesters. They use energy to fracture the crystal matrix, creating a controlled rupture, Kai explained, tracing lines in the frozen dirt with a shard of ice. But the harvester's intake manifolds are rigid, designed for maximum yield, not defense. If we overload the primary cooling units, the thermal shock will fracture the internal crystal feed, causing a catastrophic blowout, destroying the harvester itself. Not by force, but by engineered failure. The plan was a high-stakes demolition job: infiltrate the main harvesting site, rig the cooling systems for failure, and retreat before the Legion could mount a serious counterattack. The success of Aethel, and unknowingly, Oakhaven, hinged on his ability to apply 21st-century demolition theory to an alien energy system. The operation commenced under the pallid light of the unstable sky. Kai, dressed in Sylvan Guard hides, moved alongside Lyra and a small strike team. The air was so cold the metal of his meager tools stuck instantly to his gloved hands. The Legion base was a grotesque industrial complex, massive, churning mechanisms built from dark metal and steam, sucking the luminous blue light from the earth. The sound of ceaseless mechanical grinding was a constant, nerve-shredding backdrop. They utilized the Sylvan Guard's greatest asset, the environment. Lyra moved like a ghost, leveraging the blinding patches of time frost and the fractured geometry of the ice forest. They dispatched the outer sentries, the terrifying clockwork soldiers, with swift, brutal precision. Kai found that their metal shells could withstand traditional kinetic force, but they were vulnerable to stress points. A well-placed lever could snap a hydraulic line, and a targeted strike to the poorly protected optical sensors rendered them blind and thrashing. Reaching the first harvester, Kai went to work. The Legionnaires used a series of crude, magnetic locks. Kai bypassed them using a technique taught in a forgotten EOD course, a precise application of force and leverage. Inside, the machine pulsed with the stolen blue energy. He rigged a small, chemically reactive charge, a mixture of Aethel's volatile crystal dust and old military solvent he had somehow retained, to the primary coolant line. It wasn't explosive enough to draw attention, but sufficient to initiate the critical failure he sought. Click. 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 3 harvesters rigged. The pressure was suffocating. Every ticking moment was a minute lost to Oakhaven and a fraction of life stolen from Aethel. As they withdrew from the third harvester, the silence, that damning, manufactured silence, was broken by a new, mechanical roar. Gearhart was waiting. He stood atop a promontory overlooking the viaduct, his brass armor gleaming, flanked by his elite mechanized squad. He hadn't mobilized to defend the harvesters, he had anticipated the sabotage and used the raid as bait. The trespasser, Gearhart's voice boomed, synthesized and devoid of human warmth, amplified across the frozen wasteland. Your predictable tactics are easily absorbed, engineer. A series of violent, shattering explosions ripped through the harvesting site as the cooling lines detonated. The shockwaves of pure energy pulverized the harvesters. The Sylvan Guard cheered, but Lyra's face was grim. He let us do it, she whispered, pulling Kai back into the deep shadows. He didn't care about the harvesters. Gearhart raised a gauntleted hand. Near the viaduct's entrance on the Aethel side, a colossal new mechanism, previously hidden, roared to life. It was a massive, steampunk-like device, a thermal generator, designed not to harvest, but to produce staggering amounts of localized heat. "You seek chaos, Kai," Gearhart stated, his voice a mocking judgment. "I seek permanence. The time frost is unstable. But heat creates liquid, and liquid destroys the barrier." The thermal generator began venting massive plumes of superheated steam and energy directly at the viaduct's crystalline structure. The blue ice screamed, shrinking, dissolving, and the polished black basalt of the bridge began to weep and crack. The portal, the tenuous connection maintained by the icy stability of the time frost, was being deliberately melted down. "He is closing the gate!" Lyra screamed. "Not with ice, but with fire!" The retreat became a desperate scramble. They fought their way back through the reinforcing legionnaires, the battle now overshadowed by the overwhelming, searing heat emanating from the viaduct. Kai, driven by the absolute necessity of escape, fought with brutal efficiency, using the terrain and his wits to incapacitate the Legion, buying seconds for Lyra. They reached the edge of the collapsing, steaming bridge. Where the crystalline formations had been, only scorched, fractured stone remained, boiling water streaming into the gorge. The air was suffocatingly hot, a localized furnace designed to eliminate the conditions necessary for the dimensional tear. Kai felt the sickening punch of realization. The mission had succeeded in destroying the harvesters, but it had failed in saving his exit. "It's gone," Kai choked out, the words tasting like ash. He destabilized the rift too much. "There's no 0 point. It's just rock." The portal was sealed, possibly forever. Gearhart's synthetic laughter echoed from the heights. "Welcome home, engineer. Now you are truly ours." Lyra placed a heavy, reassuring hand on his shoulder, her fierce eyes meeting his. The devastating loss of his only path home was quickly subsumed by the cold reality of Aethel. He was trapped. There was no Oakhaven, only the frozen despair and the looming menace of the Legion. He had engineered a victory that simultaneously ensured his permanent exile. He drew a deep breath of the freezing air and turned his back on the gorge. He was no longer Kai, the engineer in exile, he was now a soldier of the Sylvan Guard. The months that followed were a blur of frigid conflict and desperate survival in Aethel. Due to the severe time distortion, the struggle that felt like half a year of skirmishes, reconnaissance, and engineering for the Sylvan Guard was perhaps only a few fleeting weeks back in Oakhaven. Kai's new existence was defined by the deep, unnerving silence of Aethel, a quiet that had now replaced his fear of loud noises. His PTSD had mutated, the sudden cacophony of an explosion was now preferable to the pervasive, soul-crushing quiet of the ice crypts where they hid. Here, only the faint, ominous grind of the distant Legion broke the silence, a constant reminder of the encroaching machine horror. He used his skills to bolster the Sylvan Guard's defenses, designing traps that leveraged Aethel's unstable energy, and teaching them how to target the stress points in Legion armor. He had found purpose in a world where he had no hope. In the stark desolation, a fragile, consuming bond formed with Lyra. They were two broken, tenacious souls fighting against inevitable entropy. Their connection was forged in the heat of battle and the profound despair of loss. Lyra, with her wild grace and fierce devotion to a dying world, and Kai, with his practical, analytical mind trying to save what he couldn't understand. Their love was a quiet, desperate flare, the only warmth in a land consumed by Swang Jiathoy Jan. It was a commitment made in the shadow of total annihilation. But even the strength of their bond could not stop the creeping doom. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Gearhart, now convinced the viaduct was stabilized against the frost, even if closed, shifted his focus. He stopped rebuilding the harvesters and instead concentrated all Legion resources directly onto the viaduct itself, turning the charred rock into a massive, heavily fortified bridgehead. Worse, the Legion's raids grew crueler. They stopped taking resources and began taking prisoners. Several Sylvan Guard members were captured in a brutal pre-dawn ambush, dragged screaming back toward the viaduct complex. Lyra and Kai discovered the terrifying reason for the captures during a deep scouting mission. Gearhart was not merely imprisoning them. He was preparing for a ritual. Gearhart planned a massive, highly theatrical mass sacrifice on the viaduct. He was convinced that the massive, sudden release of life energy, the spiritual and physical agony of the captured Sylvan Guard, would create an intense, chaotic energy shockwave. This shockwave, channeled through the fortified viaduct, would be strong enough to force the dimensional barrier open permanently, creating the fixed, eternal breach he craved, regardless of the time frost's conditions. The gates of Oakhaven would be forced wide by the scream of Aethel's dying spirit. The realization of Gearhart's final plan brought Kai to the precipice of a terrible decision. He had found home and love in Aethel, but if he somehow managed to force the gate open again, using Aethel's energy to flee, he would only be delivering the Legion, and Gearhart, directly to Oakhaven's throat. He was trapped in a moral paradox. Staying meant Aethel died, leaving meant Oakhaven died. The necessity of ultimate sacrifice became clear. Lyra, who possessed an intuitive, almost mystical understanding of Aethel's crystalline energy network, articulated the horror. The bridge cannot be opened, Kai. It must be destroyed. Permanently. The structure was too robust, Gearhart's fortifications too extensive to be bombed from the Aethel side without sacrificing the entire Sylvan Guard. Lyra's eyes, reflecting the blue light of the crystals, held infinite sorrow. You have to go back. You have to use your knowledge of their mechanics, your world science, to destroy the viaduct from your side. The task was catastrophic. Kai had to detonate the entire structure from the Oakhaven side, rupturing the dimensional nexus and shattering the possibility of transit forever. This meant not only abandoning Lyra, but committing an act of calculated planetary demolition. Lyra pressed a single item into his hand, an etheric shard. It was a piece of pure, unstabilized crystal, ripped from the core matrix. It wasn't beautiful, it was a rough, humming piece of destruction. This is a catalyst, she explained, her voice trembling but steady. Gearhart's thermal generator is powering the ritual. If you force this shard into his generator's core, it will cause an exponential overload, triggering a chain reaction that will shatter the entire viaduct structure. It is the only thing powerful enough to destroy the bridge, Kai. It is our last bullet. The shard was hot, pulsing like a desperate heart in his palm. It was raw, dangerous power, ready to detonate at the slightest provocation. It was a suicide bomb designed for a bridge. Their farewell was quick, brutal, and utterly devoid of hope for the future. Lyra held him, her crystalline antlers pressing against his neck. Go, engineer. Don't look back. Saving your world, that is the only way to honor what Aethel has given. That is the only way to honor us. She kissed him, a promise and a final goodbye sealed with the taste of ozone and despair. He had to survive to kill the bridge. He had to betray the woman he loved to save the world she would never see. A sudden, fragile opportunity presented itself. Gearhart's excessive use of the thermal generator, combined with a rare planetary alignment in Aethel, caused a momentary instability. The time frost returned, but weakly, flickering like a dying candle, surrounding the viaduct complex. The dimensional tear opened a fleeting, unstable fissure, a narrow, throbbing crack above the scorching rock. Now! Lyra commanded. The Legion was focused on preparing the ritual ground. Lyra and Kai burst from the shadows, running full tilt toward the searing hot viaduct. The final confrontation was a desperate sprint across a rapidly disintegrating battlefield. Gearhart and his core apostles, oblivious to the subtle dimensional flicker, were arrayed around the massive thermal generator, preparing the captured Sylvan Guard for the sacrifice. Kai's blood ran cold. He saw Rex's collar among the trophies Gearhart had amassed. He saw the faces of the Sylvan Guard, eyes wide with terror, bound to sacrificial pillars. Lyra and Kai plunged into the Legionnaires, their focus solely on reaching the unstable rift at the viaduct center. They were a blur of coordinated violence, Lyra with her ice-tipped blades, Kai targeting weak joints and optical sensors. Gearhart finally turned, rage amplifying his synthetic voice. They are escaping! Close the gap! The Apostle hurled himself forward, a massive, armored weight slamming into Lyra. Kai continued running, the etheric shard burning his hand, the rift only yards away. He heard the horrifying sound of shattering crystal and groaning metal as Lyra fought Gearhart. He looked back just as the massive Apostle managed to wound Lyra, forcing her to one knee. Gearhart, realizing the game was lost, threw his body onto the controls of the thermal generator, forcing the output to maximum capacity. The viaduct shrieked. The remaining ice crystals vaporized instantly. The rock began to glow a dull, dangerous orange. Destroy the bridge! Gearhart's voice was a triumphant scream of final, glorious destruction. The rift was closing, collapsing under the excessive heat. Kai reached the flickering threshold. Lyra, bleeding but resolute, used a final burst of primal strength to shove Gearhart back. With every ounce of remaining power, she lunged at Kai, not to follow, but to push. Go! Kai! He felt the massive impact, a violent force throwing him across the dimensional boundary. The world tore. He was thrown into the searing cold, landing hard on the damp earth of Oakhaven. The last sound Kai heard before the viaduct structure completely failed was Lyra's voice, raw with anguish, calling his name. Then, a shriek of unimaginable cold, the sound of reality ripping and sealing, as the black basalt of the viaduct slammed shut, the dimensional breach closing forever. Aethel, and the woman he loved, was permanently locked away. Kai woke in the snow, shivering violently, the smell of damp earth and pine needles replacing the scent of ozone and iron. The world was blessedly, boringly familiar. The silence of Oakhaven was normal again, not manufactured, not terrifying, just quiet. He struggled to his feet. He had been gone for what felt like half a year of brutal warfare. But the sky was the same flat grey, the trees still thick with last season's snow. A distant logging truck growled. He checked his phone, a useless, dead brick in his pocket. The timestamp on the battery showed he had been gone for less than 4 hours. The reality of the temporal shift struck him with sickening force, and his lifetime of fighting was a mere afternoon in his own world. His family would believe he'd taken a long walk. As if summoned by the thought, a shadow emerged from the tree line. Rex, covered in snow, wet, and shivering slightly, bounded toward him, whining with profound relief. Rex was back. He was the only physical evidence, a wet, tangible link, that the horror hadn't been a hallucination. But Kai's relief was short-lived, killed by the horrifying weight in his hand. The etheric shard. It was glowing faintly, pulsing with an unstable, frantic energy. It was hot, not from the recent combat, but from its own volatile existence. The vision of Gearhart, activating the thermal generator to its maximum output, flashed through his mind. The Apostle would believe the gate was merely closed, not destroyed. He would complete the ritual within hours, convinced that the shockwave would still force a new, permanent breach. If Kai waited, Gearhart would succeed. The viaduct stood before him, now just a massive, inert monument of black, cold rock, utterly silent in the Oakhaven air. It looked harmless, a beautiful architectural ruin. Kai gripped the shard. It was the weapon of total destruction, a sacrifice demanded by the ghost of a world he'd just fled. The raw energy of Aethel, focused into a final, apocalyptic bomb. If he jammed the shard into the 0 point on this side, the resulting explosive energy would not only destroy the viaduct but completely shatter the dimensional tether, saving Oakhaven at the cost of every memory, every sacrifice, every moment of love he had shared with Lyra. He looked at the shard, then toward the chilling, impassive stone bridge. The choice was not between good and evil, but between two forms of devastating loss. He had to be the traitor. He had to be the executioner. He took a final, steadying breath of the clean Oakhaven air, raised the burning shard, and aimed for the heart of the stone monstrosity. The revelation of the mass entropy sacrifice hung in the air, heavier and colder than Aethel's perpetual winter. Kai didn't see an act of malice, he saw an energy equation. Gearhart needed a profound, instantaneous release of dimensional torque, a force powerful enough to overcome the natural resistance of the time frost. The viaduct wasn't just a bridge, it was a tuning fork, and the anguish of the Sylvan Guard was the hammer that would strike it. It's a failure of structural integrity scaled up to a cosmic level, Kai murmured, tracing the critical junction on his slate map. If we hit the nexus points too hard, we don't just stop the ritual, we destabilize the entire bridge. If we hit it too softly, Gearhart completes the circuit and shatters the dimension. Lyra stood beside him, her spear resting lightly on the cavern floor. The silver light from the etheric veins caught the tension in her jaw. We are not fighting for stability, Kai. We are fighting for time. The Legion expects resistance, but not an instantaneous strike at the heart. We go in fast, quiet, and absolutely lethal. He looked at the faces around them, grim, determined, utterly resigned to their fate. These were defenders facing extinction. We need to hit the pylons supporting the 0 point. The captive guard are likely bound within the primary anchor structure. If we can trigger a cascading failure in the energy relays before the moon eclipse peaks, we might overload the input, not the output. We stop the ritual by destroying the wiring, not the machine. As the hours dissolved, Aethel's bizarre cosmology asserted itself. The sickly violet light intensified, filtering through the ruins. High above, the alignment began. A celestial body, larger and darker than Oakhaven's moon, began to pass directly in front of the primary etheric nebula. The effect was immediate. The air grew intensely charged, tasting of ozone and burnt metal, and the low, constant hum of entropy spiked into an unnerving whine. The Sylvan Guard moved like shadows across the shattered landscape, Lyra leading the spearhead. Kai, despite his training and the protective shielding Lyra had gifted him, felt the familiar tightening in his chest. The silence was overwhelming, punctuated only by the measured scuff of boots on frozen grit. The viaduct loomed closer, a skeletal monument of black iron, its base now churning with the low, frantic mechanical activity of the Legion. Lyra paused just short of the final observation ridge, turning back to him. The strange, eclipsing light made her crystalline horns look like blades of solidified moonlight. "The engineer is going to the heart of the engine," she whispered, her voice rough. "The engineer is going to apply a controlled demolition," he corrected, forcing a steady breath. "I need 10 minutes inside the anchor tower. I'll use the crystal charges to disrupt the feed cables and create an immediate, localized feedback loop. You buy me that 10 minutes, Lyra." She reached out, her cool hand gripping the back of his neck, pulling him into a searing kiss, a desperate assertion of the life they had found in this dying world. "We fit here, Kai," she murmured, her silver eyes blazing with the reflection of the collapsing sky. "Don't forget what we are fighting for." The signal was a flare of pale blue etheric fire, momentarily illuminating the viaduct's brutal architecture. The Sylvan Guard surged forward. The noise hit him instantly, not the dreaded quiet, but the deafening, metallic shriek of battle. The Legion's automatons responded with grinding efficiency, their optical sensors glowing red in the deepening gloom. Lyra was a whirlwind of motion, her spear a blur of lethal defense, cutting through the ranks of mechanized soldiers like paper. She was the heart of the storm, drawing fire, creating the necessary vacuum for Kai's infiltration. Kai, sheltered by the initial chaos, navigated the reinforced scaffolding of the viaduct's main anchor. His movements were precise, economic. He ignored the screams and the gunfire, focusing only on the schematics in his memory. He reached the anchor's access point, a heavy, reinforced hatch, and began the rapid process of bypassing the clockwork lock, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of a man who dealt in angles and tension. Inside the anchor tower, the atmosphere was suffocatingly hot, thick with ozone and the scent of profound, violent fear. He found the captives first, the Sylvan Guard soldiers, bound tightly, their energies already being drawn off by enormous, humming conduits drilled into the floor. Their pain was palpable, a low-frequency vibration that resonated through the metal structure. He located the main conduits feeding the 0 point, cables thick as his torso, pulsing with erratic, volatile energy. The moon eclipse was reaching totality. The energy input was spiking wildly. He pulled the salvaged etheric crystal charges from his pack, setting the timers for a coordinated, fractional detonation designed not to explode the cables, but to introduce a fatal structural flaw into the current flow. Clack clack clack. The sound of approaching mechanical footsteps echoed up the shaft. Gearhart's personal guard, perhaps even the Apostle himself, was aware of the breach. Kai slammed the last charge into place, securing the wires with frantic efficiency. His 10 minutes were up. He turned, adrenaline overriding the fear of noise, and saw the first automaton rounding the corner, its massive chassis filling the passage. Just as the machine raised its arm, Lyra's spear, thrown with impossible velocity and precision, pierced its eye sensor, silencing the metallic threat with a jarring thud. "Time to leave, engineer," her voice echoed, fierce and urgent, from the mouth of the shaft. Kai scrambled back out onto the scaffolding just as the eclipse reached its maximum coverage. The viaduct shuddered violently. A sickly, green light, the color of pure, concentrated trauma, erupted from the 0 point. The mass entropy sacrifice was commencing. He pushed the manual detonator, sending the low-yield shockwave through the cables. The effect was not instantaneous destruction, but systemic failure. The green light sputtered, then roared back, fighting the internal collapse. The energy flow became wildly unstable, cycling back into the mechanism itself. The sound was the loudest thing Kai had ever heard, a metallic scream that wasn't structural, but dimensional, the sound of the gateway trying to open and tear itself apart simultaneously. The viaduct was hemorrhaging energy, but the gateway was still trying to form. He saw Lyra looking up at him from the chaotic fray below, her face lit by the horrifying, unstable green light, a silent question in her eyes. Kai knew the terrible truth as he looked at the massive, pulsating breach at the 0 point. He had stopped the clean opening of the gateway, but he had created something far more terrifying, an uncontrolled, unstable singularity right on the edge of two worlds. The fight was not over, it had merely escalated into a desperate fight for survival against the universe itself. The silence of Oakhaven was not the absence of sound, but the deep, comfortable quiet of a small town existing perfectly outside the bounds of consequence. Kai, a man whose hands preferred the intricate logic of circuits to the messy unpredictability of human affairs, had known that silence his whole life. It was shattered not by a sound, but by a chilling, unnatural asterisk-like asterisk of one. His field spaniel, Rex, usually a creature of riotous enthusiasm, stopped dead center on the old moss bridge, its tail drooping, letting out a low, terrified whine. Kai followed the dog's gaze to the bridge's apex, where a spot of air seemed to shimmer, absorbing the light, creating a zone of absolute zero sound and profound, impossible cold. This phenomenon was localized, a circular void of perfect stillness. Kai, investigating with the detached curiosity of an engineer facing an unsolvable equation, leaned closer. He felt the pull, a sudden, sharp tug of gravitational misalignment, and then the air ruptured, not with a bang, but with a rush of glacial air carrying the faint, sickly sweet scent of ozone and pulverized iron. Rex barked once, a silenced, strangled yelp, and then the dog was simply gone, swallowed by a ripple of white, freezing mist that instantly enveloped the bridge and then, just as quickly, dissipated. The first time frost lasted only minutes, but it changed everything. Driven by a desperate need to recover Rex and understand the breach, Kai spent the next 3 days gathering scavenged tools and stabilizing equipment. When the frost returned, a curtain of crystalline white descending upon the old bridge, Kai walked directly into the blinding haze. He emerged onto a landscape of unimaginable horror, Aethel, a realm choked by unnatural ice and mechanical cruelty. The air here was thin, poisoned by geothermal runoff, and constantly scored by the sounds of industry. Within seconds, a jagged, spiked automaton, dripping with frozen oil and humming with terrible efficiency, spotted him. Before Kai could react, a blur of motion intercepted the machine. A figure, tall, draped in frost-cured leather armor, with crystalline horns that branched from her temples, struck the automaton with a frost-forged blade. Lyra, the commander of the dwindling Sylvan Guard, looked at him with eyes the color of glacier ice, fierce and utterly weary. "You are the breach," she hissed, pulling him violently into the shelter of a collapsed ice spire. "Stay silent, human. Your world's signature is like a beacon here." Aethel was not a world, it was a sarcophagus. Once a vibrant, forest-filled dimension, the time frosts had accelerated its entropy, replacing flora with razor-sharp crystalline growth, and water with hyper-compressed ice. Lyra explained that the Sylvan Guard were the remnants of the native population, fighting a losing war against the Clockwork Legion, invaders from a parallel, purely mechanical dimension. Kai, despite his terror and isolation, was a critical anomaly. His knowledge of power generation and localized spatial mechanics was alien to Aethel's magic-based systems. Over weeks, he helped them stabilize ancient etheric wells, turning localized defeats into momentary stalemates. He learned to trust the rasping chill of Lyra's breath, the quiet resilience in her posture. They spoke of Oakhaven, its soft green quiet, its abundant energy, a concept that sounded like heaven to the starving realm of Aethel. Lyra, for her part, slowly unbent, revealing the deep, protective love she held for her dying land, a love that Kai soon realized mirrored the nascent, fierce affection he now felt for her. The mastermind behind the Legion was Prophet Gearhart, a fanatic who had weaponized faith and engineering. He was not interested in conquest for territory, but for energy. Gearhart believed the stable, unlimited energy of dimensions like Oakhaven was proof of a divine mandate for his mechanized purity. Kai's unintended crossing had opened a sliver of that purity, a signature that Gearhart was now obsessively tracking. The Legion's mechanized advance became focused entirely on the Aetheric Viaduct, the ancient stone bridge that connected Oakhaven to Aethel. Gearhart's primary weapon was the immense, pulsating array of thermal generators, which pumped raw, catastrophic energy into the viaduct, attempting to tear the dimensional seam open permanently. The prophet, cloaked in heavy brass and speaking through a synthesized voice that echoed across the ice plains, demanded the immediate surrender of the foreign anomaly and the delivery of his homeworld's energy core. Understanding that Gearhart was weeks from completing his forced breach, Lyra and Kai formulated a desperate plan. They would raid the outermost ring of the thermal generators, hoping to destabilize the primary energy flow, buying critical time. The raid mission was a brutal, suicidal sprint across the ice plains. The Sylvan Guard, reduced to a handful of warriors, moved like ghosts, guided by Kai's hastily plotted trajectories. They succeeded in cracking 2 of the massive geothermal conduits, causing spectacular, blinding eruptions of pressurized steam and frozen magma. The Legion's advance stuttered, and a momentary, ragged cheer went up among the surviving guards. They retreated quickly, convinced they had bought weeks, perhaps months, for Oakhaven to prepare, allowing them time to wait for the next stable time for us to return home together. They found temporary sanctuary deep within the twisting, crystalline roots of a dead ether pine, a species that grew only in this dying reality, its hardened sap forming translucent, razor-sharp shelters. Outside, the sickly purple twilight of Aethel was being rapidly consumed by the encroaching machinery of the Clockwork Legion. The grinding sound of heavy drills and the rhythmic, merciless clank of metal boots echoed across the chasm, converging relentlessly upon the Aetheric Viaduct. Kai sat hunched, his field calculations scribbled onto a piece of crystallized bark, trying desperately to find an equation that allowed them both to survive. Weeks in Aethel had felt like months, the accelerated time warping his internal clock. His PTSD, once triggered by sudden noise, was now haunted by the pervasive, unnatural silence between the Legion's mechanized movements, the sound of true entropy. "It won't work, Kai," Lyra said, her voice low and tight, her gaze fixed on the distant, terrible glow emanating from the viaduct. Gearhart's preparation for the ritual was nearing completion, bathing the ancient stone in an unnatural, malevolent crimson light. Kai slammed his fist against the ground, shattering the fragile crystal beneath it. "We cracked the thermal generators. We bought weeks, maybe months for Oakhaven. We can wait for another natural time frost, and we cross together. We take the remaining Sylvan Guard back, warn them, and..." Lyra moved swiftly, grasping his face between her cold, firm hands. The branching crystal horns that emerged from her temples pulsed with a faint, anxious blue light. "No," she interrupted, the word a stark pronouncement of doom. "You still don't understand the Legion's technology, my engineer. They don't just use power, they track its disturbance. When you first crossed, they registered an energetic anomaly, the ghost of your homeworld's signature. That is why Gearhart is so obsessed with the viaduct now. He believes you are the key." A wave of freezing dread washed over Kai, colder than the permanent ice of Aethel. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that if you merely escape, if the gate opens naturally and you flee, they will follow. They have calibrated the gap. They will use the energy wake you leave behind to anchor their invasion. Oakhaven will not have weeks. It will have hours before the Legion pours through, seeking that pure, unlimited energy source they desire." Kai felt the breath catch in his throat. He hadn't just accidentally stumbled into another dimension, he had inadvertently painted a target on his entire world. The guilt was physical, crushing him under the weight of cosmic responsibility. "Then what are we supposed to do?" "Fight them off," he whispered, glancing at the few remaining, exhausted Sylvan Guards shadowing them. Lyra took a slow, deep breath, her eyes glazed with a terrible, icy resolve that he recognized as true sacrifice. "You must destroy the bridge. You must sever the connection, not just close it." "Destroy the viaduct?" Kai scoffed. "It's made of solid, impossible, uncrackable basalt. It's a dimension anchor. We tried blasting the supporting pillars months ago. It absorbed the energy like a sponge." "From the inside, yes," Lyra confirmed, her grip tightening. "But from the outside, your reality, it is just an ancient stone bridge holding a phenomenal, unstable pocket of vacuum energy." She reached into a pouch woven from frost-cured leather and retrieved an object that instantly dominated the shadows in the small shelter. It was the heart of their predicament, the weapon of their mutual destruction. It was an etheric shard. The crystal was roughly the size of a man's forearm, not the smooth, elegant azure of the stable deposits, but a chaotic lattice of jagged, black-veined ice and hyper-compressed energy. It did not merely reflect light, it seemed to eat it. When Lyra placed it gently in Kai's hand, the cold was immediate and searing, a burning cold that promised systemic failure. This is Aethel's core blood, Kai. It is not refined. It is raw, volatile entropy, she explained. The crystals that the Legion harvests are regulated. This one is unstable. It is vibrating with compressed chaos. If you overload its internal stabilizing matrix at the exact moment it crosses a dimensional threshold, it will detonate a localized spatial collapse. Kai stared at the shard, feeling the dangerous thrum against his palm. It felt alive, furious. It'll create a massive dimensional bomb. Precisely. You must place it at the 0 point, the exact center of the bridge, where you first registered the dead zone, where Rex disappeared. Gearhart is using that point for his ritual. His machine generators will be pumping maximum, uncontrolled energy into the anchor to force the gate open. The shard will absorb that energy and use it to fracture the anchor itself. Kai's mind, the engineer's mind, raced through the variables: energy density, structural integrity, spatial rupture coefficient. It was theoretically possible, a horrifyingly elegant solution to a cosmic problem. But the cost? And then? Kai's voice was hoarse. What about the Sylvan Guard? What about you? Lyra looked at the chaotic purple sky, a landscape she knew was dissolving around her. The destruction of the viaduct anchor means the complete, immediate, and permanent sealing of this realm from yours. Aethel will be isolated. The Legion may not stop their mechanized campaign, but they will be trapped here. Our fight becomes ours alone once more. And you expect me to leave you? The question ripped itself from his chest, sharper than any piece of crystal. He had found a reason to live, a reason his PTSD was momentarily muted, her. The thought of permanent separation was unbearable. You have to, Kai, she insisted, stepping close enough for their foreheads to touch, her warm breath momentarily fighting the cold. Your heart is here now, I know. But your world, the green, silent world you described, the world that still has a future, it needs your memory. You are the only one who can carry this memory and this weapon across the threshold safely. I won't leave you to face Gearhart's fanaticism alone. We won't be alone, she countered, a grim smile touching her lips. The few of us remaining will make sure he never completes the ritual, even if it's the last thing we do. We will hold the line long enough for the time frost to open a fissure, and long enough for you to get across. She pulled back, the decision already made, sealed by the inevitability of Aethel's death. This was not a negotiation, it was a final, painful duty. Look at me, Kai, she commanded, her eyes, usually fierce, now softened by a depth of love that was utterly heartbreaking. We fought the machines. We survived the ice. We found love in the ruin of existence. But love cannot save a dying world. Your world can be saved. Use this. Use everything I taught you. Use your knowledge to destroy the connection that brought us together. She pressed the shard deeper into his hand, forcing him to accept the terrifying weight of it. This is the only way to honor what Aethel has become, a sacrifice. Go back. Live for both of us. Tell your dog he was a good, loyal beast. The finality of her words broke something deep inside him. He knew the argument was over. To stay was to die, and to die meant Oakhaven would fall. He had to become the instrument of their separation. As the first faint wisp of an unstable, thin, white mist, the ghostly precursor to the required time frost, drifted into the cave, Lyra stood up, gripping her frost-forged blade. It begins, she stated, her voice returning to that fierce, determined tone of the Sylvan Guard commander. Get ready, Kai. When the fissure opens, you run. And you don't look back. He could only nod, his eyes locked on the terrifying, vibrant energy of the shard, knowing that the thing he held was not merely a bomb, but the death certificate of his time with Lyra, and the ultimate, most painful act of survival. The time frost burst forth, not a gentle mist this time, but a savage gale of freezing white energy. it tore a jagged, screaming fissure in the air just ahead of them. The viaduct was visible through the temporary dimensional tear. The grey, familiar stone of Oakhaven's bridge starkly contrasted against the basalt of Aethel. Lyra gave a sharp, wordless cry, the signal for the Sylvan Guard's final, desperate offensive. They burst from the shelter, running not toward safety, but toward the heart of the Legion's encampment near the viaduct's base, aiming to draw all attention away from the dimensional gap. The Legion responded instantly, their heavy treads shuddering the ground, turning their drills and cannons toward the distraction. Kai felt the icy weight of the etheric shard in his hand. It was humming now, feeding on the ambient chaos. "Go!" Lyra's voice was the last sound he heard clearly over the roar of battle and the crackle of the closing fissure. He ran, sprinting across the treacherous, crystalline fields toward the viaduct, toward the 0 point, toward the destruction of the link he had unintentionally forged. He crossed the battle lines, ignoring the searing laser fire and the deafening clank of metal. He could see Gearhart's primary ritual machine, a monstrous amalgamation of brass and glowing crimson wiring, positioned exactly where Rex had vanished. The machine was screaming, feeding the bridge with pure, catastrophic energy. Kai plunged into the roaring, unstable energy field of the time frost. For a terrifying second, he was unmoored, suspended between dimensions, the world dissolving into flashes of purple ice and green grass. He staggered out onto the Oakhaven side of the bridge, the familiar scent of damp moss and river water momentarily shocking his senses. The 0 point, the dead zone, was glowing with a ferocious crimson light drawn from Aethel. Gearhart's ritual machine was now half visible in his reality, a monstrous intrusion thrumming violently. Kai had seconds before the fissure stabilized and the Legion could cross in force. He threw himself forward, feeling the shard grow scorching hot in his hand, its chaos matrix overloading on the sheer energy of the collapsing dimensions. With a final, agonizing push, he jammed the etheric shard directly into the central pulsing conduit of the machine, right at the 0 point of the old moss bridge. The detonation was not sound, it was silence, magnified. It was an impossible, blinding white light that seemed to erase space and time itself. The light instantly consumed the ritual machine, the basalt of the viaduct, and the remaining sliver of the dimensional fissure. Kai was thrown backward by the shockwave, landing hard on the soft grass of Oakhaven's bank. When his vision returned, the viaduct was gone. The ancient bridge had been truncated, the stone at the 0 point pulverized into fine, glowing dust, replaced by a permanent, unsettling distortion of space that hummed only with the quiet life of his own world. The portal was sealed. Aethel was a sacrifice, completed. He stood, shivering not from the Oakhaven air, but from the memory of impossible ice. Kai walked slowly away from the ruins of the bridge, the guilt and the fierce love for Lyra now permanently etched into his soul. He was the engineer who had saved his world by destroying his heart. He walked toward the familiar sounds of the town, utterly alone, carrying the silent testament of a lost world. When he reached his home, the first thing he saw was a familiar, eager flash of brown fur bounding toward him. Rex, confused and unharmed, raced up, barking with overjoyed familiarity. Kai sank to his knees, burying his face in the dog's neck, the sharp scent of spiritual gunpowder replaced by the soft smell of grass and dog hair. Lyra's final command echoed in the newly restored silence of Oakhaven, "Tell your dog he was a good, loyal beast." And Kai knew, for the rest of his life, he would carry not just a memory, but the heavy, necessary truth of Aethel's sacrifice. He survived, so that a world could live, green and silent, without him.